So I'm incredibly excited to have Ali join me today. How are you doing, Ali?
Hey there, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And so a little bit of a breakdown. I have a number of questions that I'm going to ask Ali. She's going to give some fantastic insight into how to effectively manage a remote team. What does that look like? The techniques you can use, how to structure, how to organize, how to manage people individually. Ali's going to give some great insight into that. And then at the end, then I'll open the floor to questions. And if anyone has any specific questions for Ali, feel free to fire away. So I think that's it. I've got a couple more people joining. But I think if you're good to go, Ali, I'm ready to go with questions.
Awesome, let's dive in.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll get going, Ali, at kind of like a higher level. So I guess in your personal experience, what's the best way to structure morning stand-ups? Because obviously that's like kind of the biggest or one of the most important meetings of the day. That's where people obviously get together and discuss the workday and what they're going to be achieving. So what's in your experience, what's the best way to structure a morning stand-up or a so-called update meeting? And kind of how frequently do you think you should do them?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I think a lot of it depends on your team and the cadence that you're used to communicating, as well as if you're used to working remotely or not. In my experience, update meetings and stand-ups, I love the shift of that from synchronous communication to asynchronous communication and actually doing those stand-ups in written form instead. And the reason for this is people working from home might have different morning routines in their personal life or might be working on different time zones. And so the start of the workday might look different for people based off of whether or not they're working from home with other adults who are working from home, whether or not they're working from home with children who are currently not in school because of the current crisis, whether they're located in Asia or Pacific time or somewhere in Europe. And because of that, I love using tools and systems where people can give their check-ins virtually and have a rolling basis for the stand-up. So when people do chime into work for the day, they can say, okay, I'm here, I'm present, and I'm going to shift to work mode. And the way I'm going to do that is by letting the stakeholders that I work with know, for me, what is my top priority. I think this fosters autonomy and allows for all of that flexibility. What is important, I think, is the content it includes. And so always including what is your top priority, what are the other tasks that you're focused on that day or that week that's going to compete for time and maybe become a roadblock for that top priority, when you're available that day, knowing that it might change day to day for your teammates. And so giving that information proactively is really useful in case they do need to get in touch with you in real time on the phone or on a video call. And then asking for help and support. So what do you need support on, or what additional questions do you have for your teammates? And I think that that can happen daily. It shouldn't take too long, and it kind of sets you into work mode. Or another format that I really like is committing to things on Monday and then having a Thursday check-in before the end of the week to say, am I on track to hitting my top priority before the end of the day on Friday?
Fantastic. Yeah, and that kind of leads me quite nicely to my next question, Ali, because I understand for, myself and you, we are used to working like this, are used to working outside of the office and remotely. But for a lot of managers who are very new to this, and all of a sudden overnight you're asked to work from home, and it can be very demanding, right? And very kind of quite confusing, because those people are used to kind of physically working side by side with a team and being able to just check up on them whenever, just kind of see, as a whole where everyone's going. So my next question, Ali, is I guess, do you have any advice for managers or team leaders who I kind of feel right now that they have a lack of control over their team? Maybe they don't know whether their team are coping. Maybe they, like worried that their team are not hitting their deadlines, and just kind of overcoming that fear of, just because you're not both physically in the same room together, that doesn't mean that you still can't work harmoniously together, in different locations. Particularly, like I said, for particularly people that this is just so brand new to them and they just don't have any kind of systems in place yet.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good question. And for some context for everyone joining us, in my last role, I was managing a team of 5 people while I was traveling full time. So always in different time zones, never in the same room. And one of the questions that I got asked most often is, how do you know when your team is working? And my response was, usually, if you're a manager in an office, how do you really know your team is working? Is it just because you're showing up and saying hi over coffee? Like, what is it that makes you feel in control? And by flipping the script in that way, I think it helps managers start to have self-awareness around the fear that they have about this lack of control and not having, at the end of the day, it comes down to visibility, transparency, and trust in their teammates. And so shifting from an office environment where you're getting that physical visibility, and maybe trust because of the physical proximity, how do you replicate those things and even go deeper remotely? And so creating that sense of transparency through the check-in model we just discussed, in terms of, what do I need support on? What do I need help with? And having it be a two-way street. Managers, talking to their employees and say, hey, one of the things that I need help with is just a quick update from you all every day, so I know if we're on track to meet the milestones of this project, as we're all getting used to this system. And then if you realize that those daily updates are redundant, then moving them to bi-weekly or once a week. I think finding the tools that, and I know we're going to talk about tools later, but finding the tools where you can meet your team where they're at is really important, so that you can communicate the content effectively, and talking about, like, what are the struggles on the team, and setting up frameworks to check in. So either it can be the daily stand-ups, which we've talked about, or even a cadence based off certain triggers. When you scope out a project, let's chat about that in real time. When you hit a certain milestone in a project, let's regroup before a decision is made and talk about the recommendations. And so I think from a very tactical standpoint, that is how managers know if people are hitting those deadlines, because they can say, hey, it was projected you were going to hit this deadline in a week from now. So by the end of the week, you should have a rough draft and let's talk about it. I also think in order to increase trust, to focus on the relationship is really important for managers who feel like they have a lack of control. Something they do have control in is continuing to get to know their teammates, even though they're not physically together. And so making sure there's dedicated one-on-one time where you're just continuing to talk to your employees about how things are going, what they're struggling with, even things like what their normal lunch looks like now that they're working from home, and if they've gotten to go outside and have some fresh air, can be really refreshing and create some trust through vulnerability. We're all in this very weird, chaotic, unique experience together right now. And I think the more that managers can just remain human and be someone that their employees know they can lean on, will be really moving to not just the work, but also the relationships.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, Ali. And I guess as well, we've spoke about it before, haven't we? Is try, obviously time, we get that, it's really important, but also having trust in, if there's deliverables and deadlines set, and those targets, it's not necessarily, I mean, I appreciate everyone does have to operate on similar time zones, but like I said, we've both worked on different time zones throughout the world. And as long as the expectations are there and the deadlines are there, it doesn't matter too much, when the workday happens for particular people. It's just, as long as that deliverable is met, as long as that task is achieved, we're also moving in the same place together. So even just switching to that type of mindset, I know it doesn't happen overnight. It is very difficult, but I think that can help reduce a lot of anxiety as well, of just thinking, I don't know what my team are up to right now.
Yeah, and I think you can get really granular with that. I think so much of this conflict and fear at work is because of a lack of clear definitions. One of the definitions is, what does done look like? When should I alert the stakeholders that, like, this is ready to be implemented? Or definitions of even the time zone clarity, like, hey, can you get this to me by end of day? Well, in a remote setting, what does an end of day look like if people are balancing childcare, family dinners,
Mm,
and maybe working in the evenings after when they finally can have some quiet in their home. So even divining like 5 p.m. Eastern time, I think is really useful because it prevents any misunderstanding right from the get-go, where people have really genuine intentions of getting their work done, doing a good job, pushing the goals forward of their team. But because of a misunderstanding, like what does end of day look like, you could have a really negative experience with your manager because you're both expecting different things. And so I think having really clear definitions is super important for remote communication, as well as super granular expectations. And so we talk already about, what does the expectations for communication look like? It could be as granular as you're starting to build remote trust of, hey, if I send you a text message or a ping on a more instantaneous communication channel like Slack or Mattermost, I expect you to get back to me in a couple of hours, versus
mm.
if you send me an email, I expect you to get back to me within 24 hours. And so you should use one channel for urgent communication and the other channel for things that are important but not urgent, and even clarifying how to use the different tools and what the timelines look like will help people build trust by not dropping the ball, or
Yeah.
build trust by not, being let down because their expectations weren't realistic or obviously communicated to the people they're working with.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Ali. And talking about tools, actually, that leads me on quite nicely to my next question. So I've broken this down into a few different sections because there's a lot of tools out there. We all know that. We've kind of already, loads of us been bombarded with so many different, software and tools and services, and there's so many to pick from. As someone, Ali, who's done this now for a number of years, and like you said, not even just within one country, you've managed teams across several time zones, simultaneously. So that in itself brings a whole heap of new challenges. But from personal experience, Ali, in terms of kind of comms, we can bucket video conferencing into that as well. What is your preferred tool, or what is your preferred combination of tools, and why is that?
Yeah, so for communication, Zoom is great for a lot of reasons. I particularly love in Zoom some things like these reactions, which like makes things a little more obvious for people that are visual. The chat, which caters to more introverted people, especially in group calls like this, where there's quite a lot of people, as well as the breakout rooms. So the
Mm,
ability to have interactivity similar to what you would do in an in-person workshop. Like, let's say we have 20 people on a call and we want to brainstorm a new brand for a product launch. Well, we can go through the goals of it while all 20 people are in the call, split people up into groups of 4 remotely, have them all chat and come back with their ideas, and then split people into different groups, maybe this time with like 5 people or 6 people in a group. And it makes it really fun and mimics a lot of the behaviors you would see in real life.
mm,
Um, Zoom lately is getting a lot of attention, both positive and negative. And so
yeah.
it is, I think, worth bringing up some of the security concerns that you might have been seeing in the media. So I did want to present a few alternative options if security is of utmost importance to you. One, on Zoom, you can do things like this call today. Dale had to admit people in, which is one barrier to making sure the proper people are joining the call. Other tools that I think are useful for video conferencing is GoToMeeting, which might feel a little corporate for some people, but I think is trusted and reliable. There's also a service called Whereby, and I can put it in the chat for people that are not familiar with that. And this is a video conferencing tool where you don't need any download, so it's completely
Mm,
done in your browser. And so it's really helpful for people that are just getting used to this and experimenting with different tools for their remote team and want to have an instant solution without a commitment. You can just go ahead and start using this. I'm also a big believer, I mentioned earlier, of meeting people where their skill level is at. This is already an anxiety inducing experience for a lot of people transitioning from
mm,
working in an office to working from home. Learning a new technology on top of that, I think, can be too much of a learning curve. And so even simple things like group FaceTime, if all of the people you're working with are on Apple
mm,
products, you can now FaceTime, I think, with up to like 20 people or something like that. So quite a large group of people to use a tool that people might be more familiar with already, as well as things like Skype and Google Hangouts.
Fantastic.
So a long list.
No, it's great, Ali. It's good for options as well. Yeah, particularly around technology as well. Because yeah, like a lot of us take this for granted. You know, if you've used things like Zoom or Slack for a number of years, it's second nature. But to a lot of people who are used to using email and just having, you know, they don't need to have a big comm setup because they all work in the same office. I can imagine it's overwhelming. So yeah, thanks for that list, Ali. It's really helpful. And on the topic of tools, so I'm going to switch it now to organizational and tasks. So, you know, obviously a lot of people have heard of the likes of Trello. You know, that there's lots of different tools out there. You know, it's something just simple to-do list like Wunderlist even, sorry. And there's various other ones as well. But from your professional opinion, Ali, in terms of organizing a team, in terms of deliverables and tasks, not communication per se, but just what needs to be done, what has worked for you? What combination of tools, or is there one in particular you think people should check out?
Yeah, so hands down, my favorite one is Asana. I feel at this point I should be like an affiliate for them. I'm not. So what I love about Asana is there's lots of different ways to interact with the tool, to not just be a project management software, which is what it's normally used for. And so it's great for managing projects and breaking them down into actionable tasks that need to get done. Within that, you can have your own private to-do list or tasks to execute against, as well as share them with stakeholders, again, to help with things like transparency and communication asynchronously. And so I think this is a really great tool to collaborate on projects, as well as to keep yourself focused in terms of literally checking things off throughout the day, but also making sure that projects are heading towards the right milestones, including the right stakeholders. Asana was pretty much the virtual office for the last company I worked in. So in addition to all the project management tools, we also collaborated and shared things like our internal policies and processes and document organization all in there as well, by keeping projects open and listing out as tasks or subtasks information that people need to find. And so they could star those or follow them if they wanted more frequent updates, like anytime people had tips on, you know, executing the vacation policy, for example, people could share and comment. And it made it a really collaborative way to approach things, just like company-wide updates as well. I feel like you can't have a conversation these days without talking about Slack. I actually, funny enough, use Slack more personally than professionally, which I don't know if that makes me like this total like techie or what. I can't speak to Slack professionally. I've used it for a lot of my personal side projects, conversations with people in the industry that I'm in, and sharing resources on there. What I love about Slack is the ability to filter out to different channels a very specific interest. And so I'm in a Slack group for women working remotely, and it's broken down where there's interest groups based off of your actual location, but as well as things like sharing resources or sharing virtual events. And so what I love about Slack is you can be part of a community, but really dial down on your specific interests as well. And I think it's a really fun tool for more instant but still asynchronous conversations. I know a lot of companies use Slack to keep their records as well, and I'd love to talk to if any of you are a manager at a company like that, because for me it seems to get lost in the shuffle. So my recommendation for Slack is always, this should be informal conversations to push relationships forward or to push work forward, but once a decision is made, there should be a long-standing single source of truth. For me, that's always been Asana. I know people that move it into like Airtable or Google Docs, but I do think it's important to recognize what is just a conversation and what is a business decision where we need a record maintained.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just quickly jump in with a point and we'll move on. I know that, it's very, when everyone tells you to go for a certain software, right, you feel like, oh, well, everyone else is using it, I should be too. But I mean, from personal experience, I remember when I was managing a creative team, and they just were not responding to Trello at all. And when you think about it, Trello is actually it's text-based, right? Everything is written and organized. So we tried Monday, and purely just because everything was color-coded in Monday, the creative team responded far better because you could set different colors to the urgency of tasks. So you could say, okay, this is urgent, you make it red, this is in progress, you can make it a lighter color. And just that switch was incredible, and the way people respond. So I guess, just something to take away from this, everyone, is yes, Trello, Slack, all these kind of big tools out there, they work, but that doesn't necessarily mean they work for everyone. And there are a lot of alternatives, and sometimes, a lot more inexpensive alternatives as well. So it's definitely worth trying one or two, and seeing how your team responds to it. Because, just because everyone's using Zoom and Trello and Slack, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you, particularly if you work in a small team. So something to think about. Anyway.
I love that comment too, because so many people want to know what tool is going to solve their problem. And in my opinion, no tool will ever solve your business problem. It's how you use the tool and how you adapt it into your company culture and the expectations that you set around the why, the how, the when of interacting within that tool that is going to make it successful or not successful.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Ali. So we'll shift away from tools now. We'll just come in. I've got a couple more questions to ask Ali, and then we'll open to the floor. One thing that I, in particular, am very kind of intrigued by is the makers versus manager schedule, right? Because I think, particularly, I've worked with a lot of creatives in the past, and being kind of creative minded myself. There are a lot of people who are on a maker schedule where the constant expectation of calls and meetings and things like that can be very kind of frustrating and kind of ruin the day almost, because a maker and a manager, the way their brains approach the day are two very different things. And makers really need that uninterrupted, blocked several hours to do sometimes just one thing. It could be, I need to code the back end of the site, or I need to design a brochure. But I feel like a lot of managers now will sort of struggle in the sense of, okay, well, I need to keep in touch with my team because I'm working remotely. I need to make sure that everyone's okay. But you can kind of almost over communicate then and frustrate someone who is just purely on a maker schedule. They're say a junior position graphic designer, and they're task driven, they design, and they don't do anything else. So from your experience, Ali, or just generally, how have you dealt with this in the past? How have you been able to go, right, okay, well, this person is more, on a manager schedule, this person on a maker schedule. How do I find that balance between kind of not overloading them with comms, but also making sure that I do know what they're up to. I do know that they're safe and they're accounted for, and that they know that they can come to me with anything.
Yeah, so I think there's 3 different ways to answer this question. One is at a company level. What should the leaders do in the company to facilitate a culture that is appropriate for both makers and managers? Next would be the manager themselves and how they're interacting with the team. And then finally, the actual independent contributor, the person who is struggling to be a maker in the organization, managing up. So I want to give a piece of advice for each of those 3 things. And so hopefully, depending on, the audience we have, there could be a takeaway for you. So at a corporate level, something that was implemented in the last company that I was running the people operations team for was to have certain days where recurring synchronous meetings were generally accepted, and certain days where it was a cultural norm not to have meetings. And what this did was, as a whole organization, it was very celebrated to have that heads down work time on certain days where communication was seen as an interruption for urgent things. And it really led that expectation that, hey, managers, you can check in, you can be friendly, but don't schedule calls with people. Let them have the space to be creative, to hunker down, and to get the work done. And so I think for your organization, it could be, doing it by days of the week. It could be based off of hours of the day, like no meeting mornings, no meeting afternoons, things like that. or also just trying to see like when are the most critical meetings and how do we schedule them based off of when people are working, and have a feedback loop for when people are generally free. So jumping back to like another tool, Doodle is a way to schedule meetings based off of when people are available for them, and sending out things like a doodle for the teams in your company to see like when do people prefer to have meetings, and scheduling the really important meetings based off of that preference to allow people to own their schedule more. Could be something led by people operations, by CEOs, by leaders in the organization, to really make sure that there is flexibility built into the culture. Taking it a step down at the manager level, I think really getting to know your team and how they like to work and what they struggle with will help them continue to focus and be able to really think through like what communication is stressful to me and what communication becomes disruptive. Things like asking people like, what is the one thing you want to accomplish this week and when are you going to get that done by, helps your employees start thinking about the way they like to work, and then going a step further and having them schedule it into their calendar so that people can't book meetings with them over that time is really useful. And so having one top priority a day, one top priority a week, where the manager and the employee get on the same page, and then the manager kind of steps away, I think is a really great way for managers to start enabling employees to have ownership over their schedule and getting the work done. And then for employees themselves, like take ownership of your time and your day. Everything you do at work is a thought, a conversation, or an action. It's like one of my favorite things that I've ever learned when it comes to time management. And people never think about the thoughts. They think about the conversations and actions, and then they plan the conversations and they hope the actions will get done. But you need to plan out everything as much as possible. So calendar in for yourself when your work time is, when your action time is. Make it's a meeting for yourself to either be reflective, to take the time to think, or to get the work done. And then checking communication on a schedule that works for you is another way that I think you can take back your time. So I know people that work on a Pomodoro schedule where they do 20 minutes of work and then a break. And after a few Pomodoro cycles, they check all their communication. That way communication is never going unanswered for too long, but you can literally like sign out of your accounts, turn off the notifications, whatever you need to focus in order to get that done is one way to do it. I always liked to do, I hate routine. So as much as I love talking about time management and productivity, a lot of it sometimes for me is like do as I say, not as I do. But what I found like works for me really well personally is closing down communication if I want time to focus, and using the check-in of communication as my way to like regain energy and be social throughout the day. And so I'll usually communicate first thing in the morning, like when I'm having a coffee, and kind of like hang out and send out a bunch of my communication. Mine's like all related around coffee, which is a little, I don't know. I'm just realizing I don't know what that I'm like makes me. It's probably the number one thing I buy at the grocery store during the lockdown right now.
It's funny. It's funny you say that, Ali, because like, I mean, this is why we're moving, you know, we talk about remote work and the flexibility of it, right? Like you might, like you laugh and say like, oh, how your finger around coffee, but like, that's an important part of your day, right? And that's like kind of critical really to you, you know, kind of pushing on and getting your workday done. So like that works for you, and that's fantastic, you know? So it's like, even just identifying that, right? That I feel like there are a lot of people that get frustrated, but it's like because they're not working at their optimum peak hours, they're not doing their creative work, you know, when they know they're like most creative or most productive, and they're doing creative work maybe in the afternoon where they're on a downward slump. And actually what they should be doing is taking that time to do something less kind of intense, you know, like maybe going through emails or something like that, and identifying those points in the day where you know where you work best, and communicating that then to your team, saying like, hey, I'm great at these hours, and that's when I'm going to block in my you know, my really kind of hunker down and get my work done stuff.
It's so true. And like for me, it's all about like the space that you're in and how it helps you work. And so when the lockdown didn't exist, and I was free to roam as many coffee shops a day as I wanted, I would use the fact that I was in a coffee shop as my focused work time.
Mm,
And so people on my team knew that I would go out for my afternoon coffee. I'd sit down at a coffee shop, and then I wouldn't be available to take synchronous calls because I'd be in an environment that'd be too loud for video. And that was when I thrived creatively to get stuff done because I loved the energy of people
mm,
coming in, chatting, and taking a break from their day. I've recreated that a little bit in my apartment that you can kind of see in the background. This is desk area number 1, and to my left I have a kitchen island that has become work area number 2. And so after lunch every day, I still do my routine. If I have my afternoon coffee, I go for a walk in circles in my patio, and then I sit down in the opposite desk of where I was working in the morning to like get my work done. And so it's something that I've been able to translate to from the real world to my quarantined world quite easily. And it's funny because you just have to have some like self-awareness around when you work
mm.
best and how you structure your day.
Yeah, and I mean, we sort of led into my last question anyway, Ali. But I think it's, I look at the question now, and I talk about, what is, in your opinion, what's an ideal structure. But when you think about it, I think the more important question is, knowing yourself, like what do you need to be productive? Particularly when you're cooped up at home, it's even more stressful then. So it is a case of you have to think, like, when am I most productive? When can I do XYZ? And kind of not being afraid to communicate that to your team, right? Because I think that's another thing a lot of people, managers and employees, suffer from. It's everyone feels kind of nervously like, okay, well, we all need to rigidly operate on a 9 to 5. But I mean, now more than ever, there's a chance to be a bit more fluid and be a bit more flexible, and say to your team, hey guys, like I am useless between 2 and 3, or 2 and 4. So maybe I should do this during those hours. And then in the mornings, don't bother me because I'm very productive and that's when I'm going to do the bulk of my creative work, or, something like that, just so people are aware of it. And I think it comes down to communication at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, there's so many things out there that like focus in on like you had to have this strict routine in order to be
Mm,
productive, or you should have like a very rigid schedule to work remotely so everyone has the same set of expectations. This is like probably a word that I've said 100 times in this is a webinar, but like expectation setting doesn't mean that the expectations are always the same day to day. It means that there's clarity on how you're going to interact with each other and when you're going to communicate if things need to change. And so even just like in this environment with like just so much news overload going on in the world, like people being impacted
mm,
personally in lots of different ways through this, like it's so hard, I think, to tell day to day like how and when you're going to be productive. You might wake up after a crappy night's sleep, read the news, and have anxiety overload and say, you know what, actually, like I need to turn off my screen for just a few hours and like reconnect with who I am.
mm,
Otherwise, I'm just going to be struggling to get the work done. So, what is better for you? What's better for a company? Is it you working at 20% of your capacity for a full day trying to get something done? Or is it you sneaking in an extra nap, closing down the laptop, and maybe just doing like an old fashioned phone call to a friend you haven't talked to in a while, feeling rejuvenated, and then working 100% for, half the day or for the evening. And one thing I really hope that companies and people take away from this is that exactly what you said, Dale, like not everybody works in the same way, not everybody is productive in the same way. And so if companies and managers can find a way to let people play to their strengths, to play to their energy, it'll result in more motivated people, more productive people, and a better work product at the end of the day. And I hope that we get there. As someone who, like there's just so many great cliches of like having that inspiration in the shower, then wanting to sit down and work, like finding a way to hone in on those moments and really own work when your thoughts are the most powerful is going to be best for employees and best for organizations.
brilliant. So that's such a great way to finish it, Ali. I love that. Well, guys, I said I Ali knows her stuff. She's given some amazing insights here. But I'm going to open the floor now for anyone who has any questions. Everyone was muted when they came in just to stop the background noise. But if you just unmute yourself, and yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. And yeah, if not, we'll finish up. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? I think we're good, Ali. I think we covered everything.
Just saw one question come in for both of us.
Here we go.
So I'll let Dale, I'm going to flip the script and make you go first on this one. What's been the most challenging one-off experience you faced and how you have overcome it?
Oh, wow. I would say for me personally, at a previous job, we worked with, at one point, the team practically covered 10, 11, 12 time zones. We had people in South America, we had people all the way over in Indonesia. So that could be incredibly frustrating for particularly people who would have to try and accommodate later hours maybe in their day just so we could get everyone on a call together. And I think I feel like we've already covered it. It comes back to communication. I particularly was struggling with it because I was ending up taking kind of calls at 12, 1 o'clock at night. The problem is, and I wasn't getting to sleep till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you wake up late, and naturally you're kind of playing catch up, and you feel panicked. And I think for me the thing that really helped was kind of saying, like, guys, like, is it essential that I'm on this call? I get we need updates and things like that, but actually, are we overdoing this? So are we just calling in all the time just to give, updates and things like that, which really we could just have written down in an email, and what actually kind of came from that in the end was we all started to think like, well, yeah, like we're kind of organizing all these calls and check-ins and stuff, but really, is it overly necessary? Or are we being a bit too over the top with it? And we ended up streamlining the process a lot better. And then people like me who are in the furthest time zones were able to actually have their evenings, and not be thinking, well, it's 5 o'clock. I want to kind of, think about enjoying my evening, but I've got a call at midnight, and you just never really have that time. So I think personally for me, and I know that's not massively relevant to some people in here who work in the UK, but at the same time, I think you just have to communicate. If you're struggling with it, and if you're getting annoyed or just frustrated at people just going, right, we're having a call at this time, book it in, or hey, we're taking this early in the morning or late at night. Communicate and say, hey, look, this is where I'm most effective. This is what schedule I'm trying to be on. And we have to find a way to communicate differently, or even if I just update via text or something like that. So I think personally for me, it's don't necessarily go with the flow. Everyone in the team has to be on the same page and find a way to communicate effectively. And for certain people, that's going to be different. Particularly in my background, which is largely with creative people some creative people don't even want their face on a screen. It's so anxiety inducing, like just having this call right now, particularly when I used to teach as well. And I had a lot of amazing students, but they were so just short of confidence and very nervous, and they just wanted to sit at their laptops and work, and accommodating that as well, I think is important.
Yeah, my challenge is also communication, but slightly different. So I think for me, one of the biggest challenges, and it's not one off, it was actually one of the most frequent challenges I've had with remote work, is losing some of the emotion and tone behind asynchronous communication. And like, people kind of like, you're like, was that passive aggressive?
Yeah.
Was that just someone in a rush trying to like get a thought out of their head before they have to go like out to dinner with their family? Like what was that? And I had all these moments where it was like, what's going on here? Like me trying to overanalyze the text and read through the lines and like wonder why there wasn't an emoji at the end of a sentence waiting for me. And one of the lessons I learned from that is called the most respectful interpretation, which is you naturally assume kind of the worst in others, but forgive yourself
Mm.
psychologically. But what if you flip the script on that, and how can you take a step back from asynchronous communication that might rub you the wrong way and say, what is the most respectful way for me to look at this message and the intention behind it from the other person? And so I think by just taking that time to take a deep breath, ask yourself that question, it lowers the like stress and like maybe the anger that's starting to build up in you, so that you can respond in a collaborative way that focuses on, team building and not tearing someone down. And again, it goes back to also, don't stop building and cultivating your relationships with people just because you're not physically present together. And so taking the effort to get to know your teammates and their communication style, I think, is really important in helping you understand what they mean behind a message. I think you guys can see me on video, like I'm smiling, hopefully, and like I, have energy and crazy hand motions. My written text is super blunt. And like I do bullet points and bold letters. And like if someone
Yeah.
doesn't know that about me, they're gonna be like, what is the difference between Ali on video and Ali in email? And for me, it's just because my brain is so wired to be task oriented
Mm.
that when I'm writing things down, it's like, how do I make the point as fast as possible?
Yeah.
Having that self-awareness and being able to share that to others, like, hey, don't take that personally. I just bolded it because it's really important. Like it wasn't me shouting at you, is something that's like really important with communication.
That's a great one, Ali. A great answer. Thanks, Matt, for a great question. You referenced knowledge sharing within teams earlier. Can you recommend a tool that facilitates easy info sharing amongst departments? I guess we could
For
jump
me,
into it. Sana, right, Ali?
yeah. For me, again, it's Asana. So Asana, you can choose who has access to different teams within your company. And so you can have a knowledge sharing project and different like projects for sub projects for each team, and upload all of the resources that you have there to share information. So I think as like a tool to house things that already exist, that one is still my favorite.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Ali. For both of you, how can you summarize condensed points hacks for communication in a remote team? Oh, it's an interesting one. What do you think, Ali? I guess from my, I'll kind of go first. I'll just spitball. I would say things to think about really, or things to try and implement is kind of don't feel like you have to over communicate. There is a balance, but at the same time that you do need to trust your team to deliver what is expected, and that doesn't mean you have to check in with them all the time. And again, that works both ways. That's an employee manager position as well. I'm really with what Ali said. It's like if you're working remotely, like you've got to be very specific, like even down to like tasks. Like don't be vague. Like be very specific. Give specific time, deliverable outputs. Even if you've got a checklist, that stuff, because you can't. I feel like in an office it's so much easier to just go over. Hey, can you just quickly run through this with me? And obviously, when you're in a remote environment, that then becomes a Slack message, which if someone's in the middle of focus work can be very disruptive. So being kind of as clear, as concise as possible. And I think the third one as well, I appreciate that, there's a 9 to 5 setup and people largely operate on it, but I think allowing flexibility and a little bit of fluidity for people who, might have children. So their morning is very rushed and difficult, or some people just naturally work better in the afternoon or in the morning. And I think everyone kind of being open about that and, putting forward like, well, hey, like I honestly feel like you get the best out of me in these hours. So at this time, it's probably best that I do X, Y, Z. And I honestly think it comes down to communication. I think it's just everyone has to be honest and openly talk about, let's come up with a way that works for everyone and not just leave it to the manager, because the manager is going to pick something that works for them or largely on a manager's schedule. And then if there's a maker in the group who gets frustrated by the constant check-ins and interruptions, that's going to create a lot of friction. So I feel like everyone has to contribute to this and come up with something that works for the team or a subset team within a larger organization.
Yeah, I think that's really good. One very hands-on tactical tip in terms of a communication hack is I'm a big fan of bringing the the TLDR to the business world, which is too long, didn't read, where you provide stakeholders a headline of what generally they need to know, and then have a link where somewhere you're communicating things in a bit more detail. That way, if a manager or another stakeholder wants to know more, they can, but the communication won't overwhelm the larger group that just needs to see the headlines. And so that will reduce confusion and back and forth, and hopefully, get rid of any non-essential meetings that might exist.
That's a great point, Ali. I think we have one more question from Louise. Thanks for this, Louise. For people who have just moved into remote working due to current situation, what do you think is the biggest challenge they will face, and how can they overcome that? I don't know if you want to go first, Ali.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give three, because I think they're all related to each other. I think it's isolation, learning how to work away from people, which impacts your productivity, and again, communication, which has been a constant theme here. So I think those are the challenges. And again, having the self-awareness to know what works for you in terms of productivity. We shared some of the tips there, but also the self-awareness to recognize when you're isolated and seek social outlets, either internally at work, and using your one-on-one times with your manager, for example, for that social connection sometimes is more important than using it for the business connection, but also seeing how else you can engage in your network professionally and personally, so that you're not feeling isolated. One of the great things about remote work is your coworkers become lots of different people. In another world, Dale and I were spending a few months in Cape Town, and we were both working on different projects there, but sometimes in the same co-working space. And so we were coworkers, and we could spitball ideas off each other, even though it was two totally different industries. And so I think that remote work just opens up your definition of who you can collaborate with. And that's one of the really great things. And then communication, really just finding what works for you, and being vulnerable and honest.
I'll talk a little bit ergonomically, Louise, because that's something that I've personally struggled with and kind of built it. Ali will laugh her head off.
An expert.
I had a pretty elaborate setup for a coffee shop, but a lot of people, Louise, the problem they'll have is they've gone from an environment that's set up for work, right? And an office is set up. It's got the proper desks, it's got the proper chairs, it's got the proper equipment. All of a sudden now you're being asked to work from a place that is set up for comfort. So you've got a lot of distractions. You've got a lot of, seating that's not designed for you to sit upright rigidly for a number of hours. And I've spent, I used to get terrible back pain and neck pain and stuff because I couldn't, I was hunching over a laptop. So over the years, I've invested in a lot of equipment and things that have helped me do that. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people can't get access to that equipment now because of the lockdown. So a couple of tips that I think people can take away who are very kind of like, oh, wow, like I'm used to having my nice chair and my big desk and a huge screen, and now I'm kind of hunched over a laptop. The first thing I find, and Ali does this as well, is try and change location around the house as much as possible. So you don't end up just sat slumped in the same position and your muscles lock up and you tighten and you crouch. Like, try and pick 2 or 3 different locations within 2 rooms of your house or a room of your house where you're at least kind of shifting the energy, you're moving, and you don't get kind of trapped in this one position where you've just become more lethargic. Number 2, I would say try and work from a table as much as possible. You can definitely switch to a sofa and work for an hour or 2, but try not to do the whole like work in bed thing or work on a sofa thing for the whole day. If you can, try and sit at a table or something, put a cushion behind the chair, to try and support your back, and, try and just keep as upright and as mobile as possible. And I think my third point is, try your best to replicate a work day. And we actually spoke with a mental health nurse a couple of weeks ago, and she had an amazing point about if you have children, like, how do you deal with that? Because all of a sudden they're in the house, they're running around, they haven't got school. And what she was saying was try and replicate like their school day. So, 8:30 you have breakfast, 9 o'clock, they would usually go in for assembly and their first lesson. Replicate that with your workday, so you both work together at 9 o'clock. So if you have children, then take the same lunch break together, have a break together, work together, and try and mimic as much as you can your normal workday. because otherwise you'll start to fall into this just kind of, it's a spiral, because it starts with, you'll have back pain, and then you'll feel sluggish, and then you don't eat properly, and then you don't sleep, and it's just this connected spiral that just, it just goes deeper and deeper, and you've got to try and stay mobile and active, and don't be afraid to break up the workday. Take a 30-minute break outside if you need to. Don't feel like you've just got to rigidly sit at a sofa for 9 to 5 and just be there all the time, because it's just, you're not going to feel productive. Like, the last thing we feel when we're lying on a sofa watching Netflix is productive, right? That's how we relax. So you need to put in systems in place, and replicating as much as you can a typical workday, even down to putting clothes on, have breakfast at the same time, take a proper lunch break, and just try your best to create that, with or without kids. For me personally, I found that's worked really well. Okay, I think that's it. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was so much fun to do, and please, thank you so much to Ali. Like I said, Ali has an amazing wealth of experience in this field, and as I said, Ali, we've both been very fortunate to work remotely, kind of not only from our home countries, but across the world in different countries, and it can be done. I appreciate it's very scary for a lot of people right now who are so new to this, but I one closing point, guys, don't, if this is new to you, and this is, you're struggling with this, that's okay. This is a skill. Me and Ali didn't become good at working remotely the first day we did it. We had these problems as well. It was very difficult for me. And like I said, I was getting a lot of pain and felt sluggish. And it's a skill that you have to learn over time. So don't ever be afraid to communicate that to your teams, and don't ever be afraid to just be honest about, look, this is difficult for me, because yeah, you've got to get better at it. It's like anything, it's practice, so over time you'll learn what works for you, and you'll find different things that can make you more productive. But if you're struggling, that's okay. Don't let that make you feel frustrated and, oh well, why can't I do this? Everyone could do it. Like I said, your living room's not designed to work from for 8 hours a day, so it's okay to feel oh, I don't quite know this. Just communicate clearly with your team, figure out what works for all of you, and try stuff. And some stuff will work, some won't, but you won't know until you try. Everyone's going to have a different way of dealing with this.
Yeah, and I think as you continue to learn those skills, things like this is such a great resource as well. And there's so many resources out there for adapting to remote work and learning how to, accomplish certain things in the changing world of work. So, just again, thanks Dale for having me, and thank you all for spending an hour of your day to hopefully get some tips on how this is helpful. I put some contact info in the chat for people that are struggling or not struggling, but just want to learn more about remote work. Feel free to say hey to me. This is a journey that I think will continue for a while, unfortunately in this sense, but fortunately for remote work in the future. And I just really want to see people and companies be successful in bridging the gap between their personal and professional lives, and be able to be effective and efficient regardless of where or when they're working. So in any way that I could be helpful to you all to continue down that path, please let me know.
Brilliant. And Cohana.io, right, Ali, is the website to find you, and you can see that in the comments now. So thank you so much, everyone. I really hope you have a great weekend, and hope you're all staying positive, and like I said, we will get through this together. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.